How could a black woman possibly own an expensive Bentley? She's obviously a thief. I've seen too many vicious black women like her, Lincoln Larson bellowed, his venomous voice echoing across the courthouse parking lot. The crowd's eyes widened in shock at the abusive officer, all because she was a black woman who owned a luxurious Bentley. But he didn't know that Rachel was an FBI agent, one who would bring the corrupt system he relied on crashing down. Would she succeed? What state do you live in? There is justice thinny law. Or just a game for the powerful. The afternoon at the commercial district was calm as usual. People came and went steadily. The sounds of car doors closing and shopping cart wheels clinking created a familiar background noise. Sunlight reflected off the gleaming roofs of SUVs and sedans. In the wide parking lot, a white Bentley sat quietly by the curb, so clean it reflected the sky changing color. Rachel Monroe stepped out of the convenience store on the east side. She held a coffee cup in her hand, carried a small leather bag over her shoulder, and dressed simply in a gray shirt, neatly pressed khaki pants. Her pace was calm, neither hurried nor slow. Her curly hair was tied back neatly, her eyes briefly scanning the parking lot, as if calculating the wind direction before moving forward. 2 rows away, Officer Lincoln Larson was busy inspecting a license plate. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a forward-leaning belly. His police uniform was stretched tight at the waist. When he looked up and saw Rachel approaching the Bentley, his expression changed. He straightened up, took a few quick steps forward, and spoke in a commanding tone. "Is this your car?" Rachel turned and nodded slightly. She pulled the keys from her shirt pocket, raising them just enough to show, but not too conspicuously. Larson moved closer, eyes scanning her from head to toe, before resting on the car's hood. She did not step back, nor did she ask why. "Let me see your registration," Larson said, without pulling out a notebook or looking at her face. His focus was entirely on the vehicle, as if it had just fled a crime scene. Rachel opened her bag and pulled out her wallet, but instead of handing it over immediately, she quietly asked, "What did I do wrong?" Larson pressed his lips together, then leaned closer to her face. "Black women don't usually own white Bentleys," he said, his tone openly challenging, "unless you borrowed it, or took it yourself." A light breeze stirred, fluttering Rachel's shirt. She handed over the documents without another word, holding his gaze steadily. Around them, a few passers-by began to notice. A man pushing a cart stopped and turned his head. A young woman lifted her phone, not to call, but to record. Larson took the registration, flipping through it. He looked at the name, then glanced back at Rachel as if doubting 2 people with the same name could exist. Finding no flaws in the paperwork, he smirked. "Still need to verify," he said with a tired finality, but his eyes betrayed a different intent. He pulled a radio from his belt. His voice was decisive, certain of his correctness. "I'm handling a suspected car thief, suspected of using fake documents. The driver is a black woman, about 30, dressed inappropriately for the vehicle." Rachel said nothing. When he ordered her to raise her hands, she complied. No hesitation, no denial, no lowering of herself, but also no submission. Larson placed her hands on the car hood, his eyes gleaming as if he had just found living proof to validate long-held prejudices. In the parking lot, under the late afternoon sun, the image of a woman forced to press her face against the car she owned began to draw the attention of the crowd. But no one came closer. No one spoke up. Rachel maintained the posture, hands still raised, head down, as if waiting for the right moment to start something bigger. Her face pressed against the cool hood, her hands cuffed tightly behind her back with metal handcuffs. Larson's footsteps circled behind, carrying the faint smell of tobacco and the clinking of keys on his belt. The breeze whipped strands of Rachel's hair loose from the bun, brushing across her cheek. She did not move. Her body remained tense, just enough to stand steady, not stressed, not relaxed. Larson bent down beside her, hands probing into her handbag. Without asking or announcing, he rummaged through every compartment like he was digging through trash. "People like you always slyly hide things," he muttered, pulling out a leather wallet, a phone, and a few receipts. His tone was no longer loud but steady, as if this was routine, like dusting off shoes before entering a house. Further away, a boy stopped, holding his phone pointed toward the parking lot. His mother tugged his arm gently, lowering her voice. "Don't get involved," she said quickly, loud enough for nearby ears. The boy still managed to record a few seconds. The light reflecting off Rachel's handcuffs flashed in the frame, a silent signal the crowd chose to ignore. Larson opened the wallet, then sneered when he saw inside a bank card, a bookstore membership card, and a small, blurry photo. Nothing illegal. He put everything back, reluctantly. "So clean it's fake?" he muttered, as if innocence were a new kind of crime. Another patrol car pulled in. The door opened. A young officer stepped out holding a clipboard. His shoes were still shiny, his name tag read Whitaker. He paused for a moment upon seeing Larson restraining a black woman in the parking lot without signs of resistance. Rachel lifted her head just enough to catch Whitaker's gaze for an instant. "What's going on, Sarge?" Whitaker spoke slowly, carefully. Larson looked up, but didn't answer immediately, only staring coldly and warningly. A slight nod, not a greeting, but a silent command. "Don't interfere." Whitaker swallowed hard, nodded, then stepped back a few paces, pretending to check the license plate on a nearby car. No one spoke further. Larson pulled Rachel's arm, pushing her toward the patrol car. She followed the rhythm as if rehearsed. No cameras were held up now. The filmer had either left or convinced themselves it wasn't their business. The door opened. Rachel was pressed into the back seat. The door slammed shut with a hollow metallic sound. Larson leaned down outside, whispering through the crack. "Maybe today you think you're safe," he hissed. "But I don't forget. Just a glance tells me who deserves to be held." She stared back through the glass. No anger, no pleading. Rachel's eyes held something that made Larson look away sooner than usual, as if he were the one being watched. In the back seat, Rachel sat upright, her back lightly resting against the door. The scenery outside receded as the car rolled forward. Her eyes remained wide open, unblinking, as if seeing through the streets, through faces, waiting for the right moment. And something, deep within that gaze, was beginning to speak. The glossy tile floor reflected the white light from the fluorescent lamps mounted close to the ceiling. The long hallway of the Central District Police Station was silent except for Larson's footsteps and the faint clinking sound of metal each time Rachel walked beside him. The handcuffs squeezed tightly around her wrists, blood pooling toward her shoulders, but Rachel showed no sign of pain. She kept her breathing steady, her eyes quickly scanning the pairs of gazes following her from the partially open doors of the administrative offices. An officer standing near the printer paused as he saw Larson escorting Rachel past. He intended to speak, but turned away, bowing his head to shuffle papers. A female officer on duty, sipping coffee, squinted briefly at Rachel before returning her attention to her phone. Those eyes were not hostile, but cautious. No one asked questions. No one stepped forward. Larson pushed open the door to the intake area. On the desk, a form was already pulled out. He took a pen and wrote each line in bold handwriting. "Suspected of uncooperative attitude," he wrote. "Signs of identity concealment. Vehicle used does not match owner data." Each line added was a layer of paint over the truth. Rachel glanced at the record, her expression unchanged, though every single word was a blatant distortion. Larson's voice sounded steady. "Remove shoes, belt, submit wallet, phone, and all carried items." A female officer assisting with the check stood nearby, hesitated slightly, looking at Rachel, but still reached out to take the items. The small leather wallet placed on the table made a heavier sound than usual. Rachel briefly looked at that spot where her agent badge was hidden, but did not react. Larson stood with arms crossed, surveying the scene like a director reviewing a shot just filmed. He nodded as a signal. Two officers led Rachel to the holding cells in the back. Along the corridor, the clang of iron doors echoed in short bursts. No one spoke, no questions asked. Everything operated like an old but smooth machine. One Larson was the main operator of. The small holding cell was lit by a round bulb in the center of the ceiling. The white-painted walls had yellowed. A metal chair and a camera are mounted in the corner of the room. Rachel entered, turned back for a brief moment. Larson stood there, hand on the doorframe, smiling faintly. He stepped close to her, his breath so near Rachel could smell mint mixed with disinfectant in the air. "You can keep that silent stance," he said slowly, needing no one else to hear but her. "But in here, silence is a confession." The door slammed shut behind him. The sound of the lock turning echoed once, then all was drowned in the faint buzzing of the overhead light. Rachel looked around. The light slanted down onto the floor, casting her slender shadow into a long, motionless shape. She sat down on the cold chair, hands gently resting on her knees, palms still marked by the handcuffs. No one outside could hear the steady beat of her heart, but every small movement in Rachel's eyes was recorded. Every face, every word, every action deliberately hidden under the guise of procedure. The sound from the intercom echoed into the holding cell faintly and choppily, sometimes breaking up due to signal interference. A traffic report blended with shift change announcements. Rachel sat straight-backed, head slightly tilted. The space was like a glass box, bare, too clean, but not comforting. She stared at the small scratches on the wall as if reading a map of previous imprisonments, then placed her hand on her thigh, motionless. Outside the holding cell, the command center operated steadily. Desk lights remained on. Phones rang intermittently. Keyboard clicks sounded in rapid rhythm. A young female officer named Morgan took on the task of checking records for the shift. When she opened the detention log, she paused slightly. A brief but contradictory note read, "Suspected car thief, identity not confirmed." No photo, no supporting evidence. The vehicle owner and detainee names matched. Morgan frowned, flipped back to the first page, intending to ask the data entry person, but the screen signaled someone had just entered the observation room. Larson walked down the hallway holding a cooled coffee cup, his face relaxed, excessively for the situation he was handling. He opened the monitoring room door, stood before the camera screen showing the holding cell. Rachel was still sitting there. "Hold overnight," Larson said firmly and evenly, as if ordering a vehicle to be held rather than a person. "She's not cooperating yet. Needs more time for verification." No one objected. An officer seated at the right corner of the desk, younger than the others, flipped the duty log to ask something, but Larson's glance made his throat tighten. The question died in the air. At the reception desk, Rachel wrote a request form to contact her legal guardian. The paper was pushed to an administrative officer, who read it and then set it aside. The reason was recorded briefly: identity not fully verified, external contact postponed. Everything matched the procedure, but was fundamentally wrong. In the temporary staff room, a few officers slowly drank coffee, avoiding looking at the screen displaying Rachel's photo. One quietly said, "Her face looks familiar. Not the type to cause trouble." Another whispered, "Probably another mistaken arrest." But no one stood to check the original records. They knew something was off, but chose silence as always before with those who came before. In the corner of the holding cell, a round camera was embedded into the ceiling. It slowly rotated through small angles, as if emphasizing every movement of the monitored person. Rachel maintained the same posture as before. She did not lie down or recline, only shifted the position of her hand resting on her knee. Her left arm still bore red marks from the time spent handcuffed. The room lights flickered slightly, the illumination wavering for a few seconds like a sigh from the system. When the camera began to swivel towards her, Rachel raised her head. Her eyes were straight and deep, as if piercing through the lens, sending a question to anyone watching on the other side. In that instant, a feeling of agency bounced back at the system, as if she were the one filming them. The small courtroom was located behind the main building, its walls painted a pale yellow. The old wooden chairs creaked harshly whenever someone shifted. Light filtered through the frosted glass window, casting a glow on Rachel's shoulders as she was led inside. Her hands were no longer cuffed, but her steps remained measured, as if maintaining rhythm in a place that did not belong to her. Lincoln Larson was already seated on the opposite side. His police uniform was crisp, the shiny name tag reflecting the light. He leaned back just enough, hands placed on the table, embodying the posture of someone in control and accustomed to standing in court as a representative of order. The judge was a man in his 50s, wearing round glasses, his voice deep and even but lacking vitality. The prosecutor sat beside him, making no notes except nodding reflexively whenever Larson spoke. Larson began his testimony as if recounting a routine patrol. He described a female individual displaying uncooperative behavior at the scene, refusal to provide documents when requested, and indications of appropriating a vehicle inconsistent with rightful ownership. He spoke slowly and deliberately, carefully choosing words to avoid mentioning race but still conveying the implication. Defiant attitude, he repeated a second time, glancing toward Rachel as if expecting the slightest reaction. But Rachel's lips did not move. She sat upright, her gaze cutting across the room. Her eyes weren't fixed on anyone specifically, but were enough to make anyone who met them quickly look away. The assigned lawyer beside Rachel was short and stocky, arms crossed, occasionally jotting a few lines, then stopping. During the first 10 minutes, he did not once attempt to interrupt or ask questions. His voice came, briefly, when asked to confirm his client's status. "We are cooperating to complete the necessary personal information." A young woman sat at the stenographer's desk, fingers lightly tapping the keyboard, but her gaze drifted. She looked at Rachel for a long moment, her expression as if trying to piece something together. After a few seconds, she bent down and continued typing, more cautiously. The atmosphere thinned as Larson continued repeating details of the arrest. Each description placed Rachel in a passive role, as if her silence was proof of something shady. Yet her firm gaze unsettled the mood. There was something in how she observed each person that made their looks falter. After reviewing the detention files, relying on one-sided testimony, the judge quickly concluded, "To ensure accurate and complete identity verification, I approve extending the detention period by 48 hours. The statement was read in a steady tone, like hundreds of other administrative hearings, without emotion, without rebuttal. Rachel closed her eyes, exhaling deeply. When she opened them, her gaze had changed, neither softened nor sharpened, but enough to make the court clerk pause mid-typing, as if someone had just spotted a landslide within the supposedly most solid place. Larson stood in the middle of the courtroom, hands placed on the report files as if directing a press conference rather than a trial. He began emphasizing, speaking slower than usual, weaving vague insinuations into every sentence. "During duty," he said, "I encountered many who feigned politeness, camouflaging themselves with education, language, and calm, but in reality, they hid dangerous intent." His voice echoed in the room, holding fewer than 20 people, each syllable reaching every ear. Some lifted their heads from notes. The guard shrugged and leaned lightly on the wooden podium, eyes drilling into Larson. The stenographer slowed her typing as if the keyboard suddenly resisted. No one objected, but the atmosphere shifted. Larson continued, this time his eyes locked on Rachel. "She wasn't loud or violent, but that's why I was cautious. People learn to hide malicious intent behind calmness. That's the most dangerous kind." Each sentence was designed to maintain a legal facade while gradually seeding suspicion into those willing to listen. Then came a statement that enraged everyone. "How could a black woman own an expensive Bentley? She's obviously stolen it. I've met many such malicious black women." Rachel remained still, eyes unblinking at the mention of malicious. A slight vein appeared on her neck, but otherwise no movement, no reaction, no outrage, just analyzing each layer of language spilling from his mouth. The back door creaked open softly. The hinge sounded dry. Someone entered. He wore plain clothes, a pale blue shirt tucked into gray trousers. No one called his name, but everyone recognized him. Whitaker stood against the wall, empty-handed, his gaze not on Larson but resting on the woman who maintained her unmoving posture in the middle row. He stood silently, as if appearing only to witness something worth remembering. Larson suddenly turned to the judge, a faint smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "I'm not accusing her because she's different," he said, then paused. "But if she were normal, I probably wouldn't suspect her. But that moment shattered into silence. The sentence ended with a gap wide enough for everyone to understand the rest didn't need saying. The judge squinted, the clerk looked away, the guard cleared his throat softly. Amid the room's pause, Rachel only looked at Larson. Her gaze neither accused nor attacked, but made his last words too dangerous for anyone to repeat. A kind of silence that did not belong to the weak, but to someone waiting for others to stumble into their own trap. The judge leaned slightly toward the clerk, whispered a few words, then signaled a short recess. Larson moved toward the table, eyes scanning to see if anyone would react. No one spoke, but the looks had changed. Rachel stood when ordered. As she turned toward the exit, she caught Whitaker's gaze. No nod, no gesture. Between them was a signal, needing no explanation or confirmation, as if both were standing in another room where the truth was locked away but waiting to be decoded. The wooden chair creaked as Rachel returned to her seat. She sat still, shoulders straight, hands resting on her knees as before. The atmosphere in the courtroom after the recess remained unchanged, except that the light had softened somewhat as clouds drifted across the skylight. Faces were still there, eyes still fixed on Larso, who stood in the middle, as if untouched by anything. The judge signaled the clerk to reread the detention report. The familiar words echoed. The defendant did not cooperate, failed to present identification, operated a vehicle of unknown origin. The voice was steady, but each word sounded harsher after what had happened. The woman taking the minutes typed slowly, her face tilted slightly toward Rachel as if trying to detect any unusual expression. Larson stepped forward, holding a stack of documents. "I have additional notes from the security cameras at the scene," he said firmly, clearly showing the subject's defiant attitude, failure to comply with identity verification procedures. This is not a misunderstanding, but a typical case of resisting law enforcement. He placed the file on the table, as if stamping a predetermined verdict. His eyes scanned Rachel, narrowing briefly before turning back to the judge. The presiding man nodded, then looked up at Rachel. "Do you have anything to say before I make my next decision?" For the first time in the trial, Rachel spoke. "May I speak?" she said, voice just loud enough, but with a weight that drew everyone's attention. Larson smiled faintly, leaning back slightly, arms crossed as if awaiting a desperate defense. Rachel stood slowly, not hurried. She walked deliberately to the wooden podium in the middle of the room. Everyone watched. Some thought she was about to apologize. Others assumed she would explain her circumstances, but no one guessed what her hand was searching for in the small file tucked inside her jacket. She pulled out a square, leather-folded case with neat stitching. When she opened it, light from the overhead lamp reflected off the metal surface. The engraved letters appeared sharp and clear. FBI, Division of Internal Affairs. She placed the badge on the table. No need to raise it or make a show. The judge frowned. A court staffer craned her neck. Someone behind the prosecutor's chair held their breath. Rachel lifted her head, eyes scanning Larson, who stood, frozen. Her voice rang out, clear and cold. "I am not the suspect. I am the one investigating you." No one said another word. The room's atmosphere thickened. The ceiling fans slowed and the typing ceased. Only Rachel's gaze and the shimmering badge remained in the room, which seemed designed only to try cases against those beneath the system. A silence stretched, frozen, among the exchanging eyes in the room accustomed to rigid procedures. Larson stood rooted, face pale, lips parted, as if to respond, but his throat tightened. He did not move. No one needed to speak. Rachel's words were enough to shake the entire courtroom. The judge leaned back slightly, his gaze slowly moving from the badge to Rachel's facey, then to Larson. He signaled a court officer to approach. The officer stepped forward, checked his own badge with unusual caution, then nodded, and quickly picked up the internal communication device. A brief signal sounded at the clerk's desk. The woman typing stopped completely. Rachel remained standing, unwavering, her eyes fixed exactly where Larison tried to avoid. "I have been assigned by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to monitor abuses of power involving racial bias within this state's police system," she stated clearly, without raising her voice, but loud enough for all to hear. "Lincoln Larison has been on the watch list for 3 months based on numerous internal reports and community feedback." She glanced at the small file left in her jacket pocket, pulled out a pre-printed surveillance order. She did not hand it to Larson but placed it before the judge. "My failure to disclose my identity at the scene was consistent with the covert procedures approved by the Department of Justice. I needed to observe the natural reactions of those under surveillance to gather convincing evidence." The judge ordered an independent verification. A court assistant connected data from the internal computer system. Less than a minute later, the screen displayed matching information. Rachel Monroe's name appeared on the list of federal internal agents, with title, ID number, and area of operation matching the file before the judge. The courtroom's back door opened. 3 people entered without introductions. One wore a light gray suit, tall and thin, a representative from the Department of Justice. The other 2 were in plain clothes, federal badges pinned to their left chests. They stood flanking the doorway, eyes focused solely on Larson. Larson began to speak, voice choking. "This is a misunderstanding. She's an imposter. I didn't—" He raised his hand as if to make a point, but the hand trembled. Sweat began to dampen the collar line of his uniform. An officer behind him slowly moved closer. No orders were given. Rachel turned toward him, her final look filled with absolute calm. "You did not arrest the wrong person," she said. "You just trusted too much that power protects your prejudice." Her words ended like a sharp cut. Larson was ordered to disarm and surrender his badge. One of the agents stepped forward, removed handcuffs from his belt, and performed the familiar procedure before the entire courtroom. Larison bowed his head for the first time since entering. Those who once supported him remained silent. Those who doubted him showed no surprise. Rachel, turning her back and leaving the spot, still held eyes bright and composed, as if the truth had always lain dormant, waiting for someone brave enough to reveal it in the light. Rachel stood once again at the center podium of the courtroom, not in haste, and without pausing too long before anyone. She placed her laptop on the table, powered it on, and entered a security passcode. As the data window appeared, the screen's glow lit up her face, casting a faint blue hue across the scattered documents beside her. The room, already quiet, grew even more silent, as if waiting for someone to pull the curtain on the truth in one decisive motion. Rachel slid her finger across the touchpad, opening a sequence of files. Each was labeled with a case ID, incident date, and the names of those involved. "I request to present files that were suppressed during prior internal investigations," she said, eyes fixed on the screen. "Reports that were deleted from the official system but have been recovered from the auxiliary server of the Police Oversight Division." An image appeared of a 16-year-old boy, his face still bearing the innocence of youth, but with hollow eyes. Rachel pointed to the caption. "Detained for 3 days at West Bay Police Department's holding cell without a temporary custody order. The report bears no signature, no file code." She moved to the next image. A report by a female officer named Denise Haley. Brief but complete. An allegation that Officer Lincoln Larson used threatening language and pressured her to falsify a crime scene statement. 2 weeks later, Denise was reassigned to a remote northern district. No explanation, no internal memo. Rachel then moved quickly through 3 other cases. One involving a wrongful arrest with altered timestamps. Another case where Larson tampered with a chain of testimonies to frame a delivery driver. And a final case where a victim's family was never mentioned in the final report, despite their son sustaining serious injuries in an unlawful pursuit. "What I'm presenting here," Rachel said, her voice firm, though not raised, "is not about reclaiming my own dignity. I don't need the system to give back what it's already taken. I want to prove that what happened yesterday wasn't an accident. It was the inevitable result of a manipulated system." The judge looked down at the documents, then lifted his eyes. heavy behind the lenses of his glasses. He turned to the Department of Justice representative. The man nodded slowly, like someone finally seeing what he had long avoided. "We propose halting the hearing," he said, "and forming an independent task force to audit the entire chain of records, with participation from the Federal Bureau of Investigation." No one objected. No one left their seat, as if standing too soon might cause a piece of the truth to vanish before it could be fully heard. Rachel turned off the screen and closed her laptop. She didn't smile, nor displayed triumph. Only her gaze remained, steady, composed, scanning each person in the room, silently asking the question she didn't need to say aloud. "How long have you all known?" A long conference table, glass-topped, stood in the middle of a discreet room on the 3rd floor of the district courthouse. Overhead lights cast streaks of white across the faces of those seated around it. Rachel sat across from the DOJ representative. To her right was an FBI agent with the steady, cold demeanor of someone seasoned in internal investigations. At the table's head sat the presiding judge from that morning, no longer maintaining a neutral expression, but silent, attentive, one hand resting atop a thick case file. Rachel placed a black external hard drive on the table and connected it to the waiting laptop. This data was provided by a former Internal Records Department employee, she said. He witnessed modifications being made to official reports, preserved the originals, and extracted the data before being reassigned to logistics. The screen displayed a list of files, each tagged with a date, the operator's name, and the internal IP address. She opened them one by one, crime scene summaries shortened, handwritten notes inserted into typed reports, irregular access logs to the system's routine checkups. Each file was a precise incision into a protocol that should have been flawless. Rachel turned the screen toward the judge and the DOJ representative, then played an audio file. A voice, low, familiar, rang out clearly. It was Lincoln Larson, in a closed-door meeting with 2 other investigators. "We don't need to include that detail," he said. "It damages the department's image. Keep it light. I'll rewrite the rest." A quiet agreement. The sound of tearing paper. Everything was captured in full. "The person who provided this recording is David Kerr," Rachel said, "a former investigator who worked under Larson. He resigned 6 months ago for health reasons, but before leaving, he gave me all of this data." She opened another file, a chart of financial linkages. The names listed under falsified approvals matched a group that had previously received funding from an NGO, believed to be the operational front for a local justice sector interest group. "These aren't outsiders," Rachel said. "They are embedded within the system, profiting from each other's silence." The list of victims began to be read aloud. A father who had once begged the department for answers about his son's suspicious death. A woman whose request to reopen her case was denied, even after new evidence surfaced. A young officer who was transferred after refusing to falsify a report. Each name, spoken, was like a blade pulling apart the crude stitches once used to mask institutional wounds with legal paperwork. No one interrupted. No one asked questions. When Rachel turned off the screen, the room remained steeped in heavy silence. The DOJ representative leaned back, his voice firm and clear. "This isn't about one rogue officer. This is the indication of a wide-scale cover-up network." Rachel packed up her files. As she stepped out of the meeting room, her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. An anonymous email appeared. No subject, no signature. Its content, a single sentence. "You haven't touched the upper tier yet." The screen dimmed, but in Rachel's eyes a new direction had begun to glow. The air in the courtroom turned to stone when the main doors swung open, revealing 3 agents in gray suits, badges clipped to their left belts. They strode in decisively, offering no introductions and casting no glances around. The lead agent walked directly to the center, where the judge and a representative from the Department of Justice had just returned from a closed-door meeting that had lasted more than an hour. One of the three lifted a document high and spoke in a cold, steady voice. By order of the Inspector General's office and with the concurrence of the State Department of Justice, Officer Lincoln Larson is hereby suspended from duty, effective immediately pending criminal investigation. A brief hitch followed, like a heart missing a beat. Everyone in the courtroom turned the same way. Larson stood there, his shoulders no longer held high, arms instinctively drawing in. His gaze flicked from face to face but found no familiar eyes. Those who had once sat beside him in meetings stared straight ahead. As though witnessing a ritual they had no right to interrupt. One agent stepped forward, gesturing. Larson hesitated. His fingers trembled as he unholstered his gun and set it on the table. The police badge came off his chest, his hand closing and opening as if forced to surrender a piece of identity he had thought permanent. A silver security pass was pulled last and tossed onto the table like scrap paper. Behind the rows of seats, several officers in pale blue uniforms watched. Their faces mixed astonishment, shame, and a silent, long-suppressed satisfaction. One of them, once known as Larson's close friend, left his seat without a word and walked straight into the hallway. Rachel remained still across the aisle, hands folded before her. She did not film, did not bow her head, and showed no triumph. Her eyes locked on the scene, absorbing every movement. Not to savor a man's fall, but to record the moment a system was forced to answer for its own wrongdoing. Camera shutters started snapping at the side door. Reporters had reached the outer hall and were slipping through the opening. Within minutes, footage of Larson being stripped of his authority spread. The first live streams hit social media with a stark headline that shook viewers. Larson suspended on the spot. FBI agent appears mid-trial. Larson was led out through a side passage, away from the waiting press, but close enough for an independent journalist to capture him walking the empty corridor between two federal agents, his face turned aside, his arms held gently yet firmly. Gone was the man who had entered in crisp uniform and confident voice. Now he was breaking news. A short clip was shared half an hour later on the largest platform. The image was grainy, but the identity of the escorted man was unmistakable. The title blazed across screens: Police Captain Escorted by FBI. Trial in Upheaval. In the background, Rachel stood upright, with no need to hide her face or add a statement. Her silence had already done its work. That afternoon, breaking news programs abruptly changed course. Sports segments were cut off, anchors shifted to urgent tones. Crawls flashed, police officers detained by federal agents in court, alleged file tampering, and racially motivated abuse of power. Blown-up frames from the blurry hallway video filled giant screens nationwide. This was no longer local news. Lincoln Larson's name had become a national focal point. Leaked courtroom clips were replayed frame by frame. Rachel's declaration of identity appeared with subtitles. Her eyes, as she displayed her badge, looped across platforms. Some videos froze on Larson's stunned expression. Others repeated the moment he removed his gun, a ritual of surrender. Commentators dissected key words and body language, as if analyzing an emblematic swing of power. National TV invited former prosecutors, veteran investigators, and journalists who had tracked the justice system for decades. One said bluntly, "We haven't seen an internal unmasking of this magnitude in 10 years. Rarely is a high-profile figure taken down publicly, in court, before cameras, and by an agent who was the direct victim. On social forums, hashtags about the case spread at lightning speed. Citizens who had stayed silent began recounting personal run-ins with the department once led by Larson. One woman posted, "My son was held for 4 hours because he drove a too nice car in a white neighborhood. I filed a complaint. No reply. Now I know why." A late-night anchor, face set hard, spoke crisp words. "I was barred from press briefings and subtly threatened for mentioning his name in an article on abuse of power. That piece was never published. Now, he can't silence anyone. Inside the regional police department, shockwaves hit. An emergency meeting was convened that evening. Division heads were ordered to review every disciplinary file from the past decade. All new promotions were frozen. Those who had worked closely with Larson were placed under internal watch. Several old cases were reopened. In the hallways, hushed groups formed. No one knew how many more names sat on Rachel's unrevealed list. In a small corner cafe, the wall-mouse screen played the late-night news. The ticker blazed. FBI confirms. Lincoln Larson suspended on allegations of file tampering, unlawful detention, and race-motivated misconduct. At the same moment, footage of Rachel leaving the courthouse aired. She walked straight ahead as the crowd parted on both sides. No one stopped her. No one dared question her. In the fading sunlight, her shadow stretched down the steps, a final, silent stroke across a system newly pierced. Rachel returned to headquarters early in the morning, when the corridors were still empty and the coffee machine had not yet reached full capacity. She passed through the administrative area. A few people glanced briefly at her, then quickly looked away, as if avoiding any interaction in complete silence. An employee who used to greet her every morning today just nodded lightly without stopping. These small details did not surprise Rachel. After the court session, the silence within the system was clearer than any warning. When she set her bag down on the desk, the internal secretary came in, handing her a piece of paper folded into quarters. "They want to meet you in meeting room 2C at 10 o'clock. She said without further explanation. Rachel looked at the names printed on the paper: Regional Legal Advisor, Head of the Administrative Department, and a Human Resources Supervisor. None were strangers. They were people who usually sat in observation roles rather than action, and the simultaneous appearance of all three indicated this was no ordinary discussion. Meeting room 2C was located at the far corner of the third-floor corridor. When Rachel entered, the three were already seated, documents spread evenly in front of them, pens neatly arranged. No smiles, no polite greetings. She pulled out a chair and sat down, keeping her back straight. The legal advisor opened the discussion, his voice not loud but enunciated clearly. He emphasized the points of lack of coordination in handling a public incident and unauthorized display of a badge in the civil court space without senior approval. Next, the head of the administrative department, who had signed Rachel's evaluation last year with the remark, "Professional demeanor, quick response under pressure," leaned forward, speaking in a lowered tone. "Are you aware that your actions not only affect an individual wrongly accused, but also place the entire image of the investigation unit at the center of controversy?" Rachel answered directly, without beating around the bush. "I showed my badge in a situation where the accused did not recognize me as a federal agent, was committing serious criminal offenses, and was using his position to shield discriminatory acts." The Human Resources Supervisor clicked his tongue, then spoke, not quite a question. "Do you know how many similar cases we had to quietly handle to preserve stability?" Rachel maintained her gaze, neither startled nor submissive. "I'm not breaking the system. I'm just showing everyone where it is breaking." Her answer caused the room to pause briefly. No one responded immediately. Then the legal advisor bent down and wrote a few lines, not looking up again. The supervisor leaned back in his chair and spoke slowly, almost whispering. "You may be right about an individual, but once you touch the system, right and wrong become less clear than you think." Rachel stood up as the meeting ended. No handshake, no farewell words. She opened the door and stepped into the corridor. The door closed silently behind her. In that moment, she understood that what she faced was no longer individual misconduct. It was a deeper foundation, where every action was decided by things not written in any regulation. And the real battle, in fact, had just begun. The small meeting room was at the end of the fourth-floor corridor, rarely visited. No nameplate, no number on the door, only a faded whiteboard hung crookedly on the opposite wall. Rachel was called here by an invitation as light as a breeze, with no clear purpose stated, no direct sender. She knew this kind of meeting. It was not meant for interrogation, but for explanation, a soft persuasion method used when all official channels failed. Inside were two men waiting. One was a mid-level supervisor who had worked with her on a technical case 3 years ago. The other was the head of data technology, quiet and always distant in group meetings. No one invited her to sit, but Rachel moved to the empty chair, placed her documents down, and kept her gaze steady. The supervisor spoke first. His voice remained gentle as before, each word careful and calculated. He talked about caution in communication, how individual actions could inadvertently set precedents, and the boundary between ideals and consequences. "How far do you intend to go?" he asked, eyes never leaving Rachel. "Do you see yourself burning down an entire building just because of a few rotten walls?" Rachel looked at him for a few seconds, not answering immediately. She understood the message behind those words was not a warning, but an assessment of control. They were not worried about her breaking rules, but about her continuing, not because she did wrong, but because she was doing right. Without permission, she replied concisely, "I will not step back just because those who remain silent feel threatened. No anger, no challenge, just a statement requiring no proof." The head of data technology leaned back, arms crossed. He had said nothing for half the conversation, now spoke quietly, as if to himself. "I don't agree with you, but I won't stop you. Just don't expect anyone to raise a hand when you need saving." That statement fell into the air like a brief sentence condemning those who crossed the line. Rachel did not argue. She stood, gathered her documents, and nodded. The door closed behind her with no echo, no farewell. She returned to her office. No one asked. No one looked after her. Footsteps on the office floor continued steadily. The printer still running, screens still bright as if nothing had happened. Everything seemed to be trying to return to normal, though everyone knew the so-called normal had been torn apart since Rachel stood before the court and displayed her badge. She sat down at her desk, uncapped a black marker, and looked at the whiteboard, once covered with a tangled schedule of shifts, data analysis plans, short notes, and old system passwords. Now, only a single line remained in the middle of the board. The ink faded with time. "Do not trust neutrality when truth is distorted." Rachel underlined that line again, stronger this time, then wrote immediately below, "Do not expect protection when doing what the system wants to hide." Each word appeared clearly and decisively, not to warn others, but to remind herself this was the time no one walked with her, and that was the moment she felt most clear-headed. A series of old encrypted documents, hidden deep within the internal archives, led Rachel to a name erased from the system, Marcus Hayes. The final approval mark, embedded in an internal inspection report on abuse of power, matched the digital signature that once belonged to him. The note was dated 2017. Just months before Marcus was removed from the FBI personnel list under the reason voluntary resignation. Rachel knew the real reason was never put on paper. Marcus was once a senior investigator who dared to delve into forbidden zones, places where reports of misconduct never reached the right hands. He vanished from the agency like a shadow, never mentioned, never questioned. She tracked down the last recorded address in the old file, a small apartment complex 30 minutes from downtown. The 3-story building was hidden behind tall trees, with no nameplate, no security, only an old guard reading a newspaper behind a chipped wooden counter. When Rachel inquired about the name, the old man looked at her for a few seconds, then pointed to the end of the hallway. "Second floor. Room 206 opened after 3 light knocks." Marcus Hayes stood there, his shirt slightly wrinkled, hair longer than in the files, a scruffy beard as if he never cared to look in a mirror. His eyes stayed on Rachel long enough to recognize she was no stranger. Then he turned away without a word, leaving the door ajar as a reluctant invitation. Inside the simple room, dusty bookshelves lined the walls. An old computer sat on the desk by the window, next to an untouched cup of coffee. Rachel stepped in, standing silently in the quiet space, letting Marcus speak first. "You're here because of the files," he said without question or confirmation. Rachel nodded, pulling a thick stack of documents from her bag and placing them on the table. "There are signs exactly like those you once chased. This time it's Lincoln Larson. Seems what you were pushed out for wasn't wrong." Marcus sat down, flipped through a few pages, but didn't read carefully. His hand stopped at a note bearing his name. His voice was low, without bitterness. "You're stepping into the wreckage that crushed me." Rachel did not argue. "And if I walk in there alone, the system will think it's innocent again." Marcus looked up at her, as if weighing how far Rachel might go. His eyes were no longer unfamiliar, only tired from someone who once believed they could fix what didn't want to be fixed. She didn't need advice. She simply took a pen, jotted a brief note on a small piece of paper, and slipped it inside the documents. "I'm not here to save you. I'm here to remind you you were right." Then she left the room. Marcus remained seated as light slanted through the window onto scattered papers. Outside in the hallway, Rachel's footsteps faded. He said nothing, but his eyes followed the empty space she left behind. The past was not over, and if this time he remained silent, maybe no one else would dare knock again. A week after Rachel left the old apartment, her phone rang with an unknown area code. She stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. A low voice spoke from the other end. "No introduction needed. I will review the files, but I have conditions." Rachel said nothing, just nodded as if Marcus could see her. They met again at a small diner nestled in a run-down commercial district. The worn wooden table, dim yellow light enough to keep identities hidden unless you looked closely. Marcus arrived first, already ordered 2 black coffees. He rested his arms on the table, eyes steady, no longer as guarded as before. "I used to believe the system could be healed," Marcus began, "until an internal report I wrote disappeared from the system within 30 minutes. The last approver was a superior I once trusted. 3 days later, I was called into the office and told to take a leave of absence due to mental health issues." Rachel kept her gaze on the table as he spoke. She let him finish, then looked up. "Do you know who was behind it?" Marcus nodded slightly. "Yes, but never enough proof. He uses others as intermediaries, always a buffer between himself and the manipulation." He pulled a USB from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. "This contains the access logs for the system at the time the report vanished. I kept it as protection. Now, it's yours." Rachel pocketed the device, nodding in thanks. "I don't need you to face them directly, but I need someone who can decrypt old codes. Someone who won't let emotions cloud judgment." Marcus gave a faint, bitter smile. "Emotions killed me once. Now I only have data." The words carried no irony, just the truth he had lived with too long. For the next 3 days they worked in a temporary archive, security separated from federal systems. Marcus sat before 2 screens, typing nonstop while Rachel stood behind, reading code snippets and drawing logical conclusions from the scans. On the 3rd day's end, Marcus stopped, pulled up a data window in the center of the screen. "There's a chain of access to Lincoln Larson's old files," he said, "less than 2 weeks ago, but strangely, the account used is still active within the FBI. Rachel was silent. She rechecked the personnel code. It belonged to someone in the administrative department, responsible for handling internal document circulation. Officially, he had no right to access high-level investigation files, but he had signed off on the report concluding Lincoln's first accusation. The same report Rachel had proved was fabricated. Marcus looked at Rachel, his voice lower. "This is the person who set me up the last time before I was removed. I don't know who he answers to, but he doesn't act alone." She didn't reply immediately. Instead, Marcus opened a list of individuals connected to the old inspection and showed it to Rachel. The 3rd name made her hesitate. She knew this person, a former operational advisor who worked directly with her on internal training projects, one of the few she once trusted. Marcus needed no explanation. Rachel's look said enough. They both understood this investigation was not only facing known enemies, but forced them to confront those once by their side, and possibly the very one who paved the way for all betrayals to begin. The night was strangely quiet. Outside, the city had just come through a light rain, leaving a thin mist on the office windows. Rachel sat alone, the glow from her laptop screen the only thing slicing through the darkness. A new mail icon lit up. No sender address, no subject line, and a single neat sentence in the body. I once stood beside him. I know I was wrong to stay silent. Below it sat an attachment, named My Secret. Rachel did not open it right away. She stared at the sentence, so silent she could hear her own breathing. She was used to anonymous tips, had processed countless unsigned letters, yet something about this one kept her suspended longer than usual. When she finally opened the file, lines of text appeared. Plain, unpolished, yet clearly not cobbled together in haste. There were precise dates and times, case numbers, and minutes of exchanges among internal affairs heads dating back to 2018. One entry referenced disciplining an officer for violating supervisory reporting procedure, yet attached neither evidence nor meeting minutes, a familiar sign of a buried record. More telling, Lincoln Larson's name surfaced 3 times as final approver, even though he had no authority to interfere with reports at that level. Rachel leaned back, eyes narrowing as she skimmed to the bottom. A handwritten sentence, inserted in a different font, read, I once watched him force a witness to change testimony, and I did nothing. Now, I know I was part of it. She launched an internal trace, but no specific IP emerged. Yet the sentence structure, the old FAMAT dates, and the unencrypted attachment made Rachel think immediately of one person, Detective Whitaker. Whitaker was a young officer who had worked alongside Larson for 2 years, known for crisp scene file work, but rarely sent to the front line. During the previous hearing, he had sat in the back row, voiceless, drawing no attention, yet Rachel had caught that look, half wary, half regretful. She had not been sure then, but now the pieces were aligning. She pulled the old logs from the secure system. In the 2018 file handling entry, just as the email claimed, Whitaker's name appeared in an indirect note. Recommend removal from review chain. Reason, insufficient supplementary evidence. At the time, Larson had signed off on excising Whitaker's complaint entirely. No one questioned the decision. Everyone assumed Larson had the authority. Rachel did not reply. She understood that someone like Whitaker could only choose this path, send once, then vanish from the spotlight. That very fact made his information more valuable than any record she had ever held. The one who had been silent was now speaking. She flagged the file, labeled it Unverified Internal Source, and created a new folder titled Blocked Chain. On the corkboard in front of him, she added a line beneath the personnel link diagram. The first link just shifted. The next morning, Rachel checked no news feeds, opened none of the old case files. She logged into the secure mailbox for one purpose only, and the message was there. Because for the first time I saw him bow his head, and I can no longer bow with him. Just one short line. No signature, no further data. Yet it told Rachel that, though the sender would not reveal himself, he had crossed an essential border, the line between fear and courage. She sat still for a long moment, eyes on the misted pane. The answer needed no further explanation. It carried the weight of years of silence, of wrong turns, of long hours in a system where loyalty was mistaken for bowed submission. Whitaker had once been among the youngest officers Larson commended in the internal training program. In an old photo Rachel had seen, he stood stiffly beside Larson, features still boyish, yet eyes already guarded. No confident smile, no trace of pride. In 2018, when a colleague was disciplined for failure to comply with superiors, Whitaker filed a protest report. He detailed irregularities in the investigation and requested a re-examination of the original file. The report was blocked. No one examined it closely. Larson was the final reviewer. Soon after, Whitaker was reassigned to logistics, kept away from the field. At one point, he had planned to leave the force, a resignation letter drafted, but a private meeting with HR kept him. They promised a promotion track if he would be patient and avoid internal disruption. Whitaker made no comment. He shelved the letter, continued the work, and stayed silent for 3 more years. Now it was different. What he sent Rachel was not self-defense, but a confession. No one made him write. No one forced him to provide evidence. Yet the silence itself, layered over each mistake, each turned face, had pushed him to the brink. Rachel did not enter his name in the file. She simply marked unverified internal source and saved everything to a newly encrypted folder. One of her final notes read, "Most likely Whitaker, but confirming too soon will drive him away." The email's data was scant, but enough to widen the investigation. Rachel reviewed the managers named in the attachment. 3 rows to the top: a former head of personnel coordination, an internal affairs inspector now working in another state, and a current deputy director of external relations. All 3 had signed files later accused of lacking transparency. On the board, Rachel pinned 3 small photos. Beside them, she wrote in red ink, "Those who stay silent to protect their foothold can also be the first to make the system tremble." And for the first time in weeks, she realized the fight was no longer solitary. Someone in the shadows, once as afraid as she was, had spoken. It was the first sign that the system was beginning to crack from within. Rachel parked her car a block away from the district police station, turned off the lights, and sat quietly in the dark for nearly 5 minutes. In her hand was an old access card, its edges chipped, the ID code no longer officially authorized but still functioning at some old mechanical doors in the basement archives. The hand-drawn map she held was marked with red symbols indicating areas not yet updated in the new control system. She pulled her hood over her head and quickly walked into the building's side entrance. The steel door creaked softly as she swiped the card and entered a secondary code. The lock turned with a faint click, just enough time for her to slip inside before the system issued an alert. The smell of rust, paper dust, and that familiar dampness of old storage facilities flooded in. The stairs leading down to the basement had no automatic lights. Rachel turned on a small flashlight attached to her sleeve. Each step echoed dryly and steadily against the concrete walls. The iron door leading into the old file storage still had a dual mechanism, a key lock and a small mechanical button in the bottom right corner, hidden beneath a sign reading, "Auxiliary Storage Area." She inserted the key, turned it a quarter turn, then pressed the hidden button firmly. The door popped open gently. Inside were dozens of old wooden shelves, files stacked messily. Many boxes of documents still sealed. She scanned the rows until reaching the section labeled Pre-2019 Reform Cases, a batch of files removed from the digital system for insufficient verification. Each file bore an inspection stamp. But Rachel noticed irregularities. Some pages had trimmed edges, inconsistent file numbers, even signatures printed in 2 different ink colors on the same document. One file on a property seizure in Spring Hill had a section covered by white paper glued over it, faintly showing the words "excessive response from command level" underneath. She flipped through 3 more files, all annotated, handled internally, not public. The addresses targeted for seizures all belonged to families of color, linked to land redevelopment for a private security company that had previously funded the department's budget. Each document was a deliberately hidden fragment, but combined formed a fractured framework. Rachel pulled out her secure phone, switched to the camera mode without flash, and started photographing each page. Her finger paused at a corner of a file sealed with adhesive. She carefully peeled off the sticker, revealing a red note signed off Larson. Part of the writing had faded, but was clear enough to confirm the commander's name. Footsteps echoed. A faint noise from the corridor made Rachel freeze. She turned off the light, holding her breath. The overhead lights suddenly flicked on. Someone had activated power in the area. Rachel's hand gripped the edge of the file cabinet, eyes peering through a narrow crack in the slightly open wooden door. A figure passed by without stopping, but the system sounds indicated the main door had been reopened. Someone was in the building. She quickly put the phone away into an inner pocket, pressed herself flat against the wall behind the shelf. That moment stretched like hours. The figure disappeared completely. No alarm sounded. Rachel exhaled softly, slowed her heartbeat, then slowly retreated toward the small door leading to the back emergency exit. In her mind, there was no fear, only a different pulse. This data could blow apart half of the cover-up network she had been tracking, and tonight, this was just the beginning. Rachel pressed herself against the shelf, breath held tight in her chest. Footsteps lightly echoed on the cement floor, approaching the main door. A technician appeared wearing a headlamp, holding a tablet, and slowly walking down the corridor to check electrical outlets and locks. He paused a few seconds in front of the storage, lightly tapped a wall socket, then muttered something indistinct. No sign he had noticed Rachel. After a few minutes he walked away, leaving only the dim white ceiling lights and the steady, fading echoes. Rachel waited another 30 seconds, then quietly slipped out of hiding. She quickly gathered the copies she had just taken and put them into a waterproof bag hidden behind her back. One hand still held the small flashlight, the other pulled from her pocket a packet of fluorescent powder, a tool used to detect faint prints on old documents. She returned to the third shelf from the left, pulled out a file clipped with transparent tape. One paper inside had a section of scraped ink, exposing a thin, fibrous layer beneath. Rachel sprinkled fluorescent powder on the page, then shone a blue light at an angle. Characters gradually appeared beneath the sparkling powder. The line read, "Incident Handling Costs, supported by Department Internal Funds." Below was a blurred ink signature, Beckett. Rachel paused for a few seconds. Beckett was a name never officially appearing in any file she had tracked. But according to Marcus's private data, Beckett had served as deputy director of the department during 2018-2020, then transferred to a related civilian organization. His name had once been erased from the power map in the system, but the trace now clearly appeared in a previously suppressed document. She flipped several more pages, searching the Direct Operations section. In the team name column, a black ink line had been crossed out, but the writing underneath was still clear. L. Larson. She recorded it, photographed each page closely, and folded the file back in order. This file was one of 5 seizure cases with obscured information, all targeted families of color in areas later rezoned for land use change. An old planning map pinned inside the file clearly showed that 3 of these zones had become commercial centers and upscale residential areas under development by a private security company that had supplied equipment to the department in fiscal year 2020. Rachel closed the file carefully, avoiding leaving traces, then retreated by the same route. At the back emergency door, she removed her gloves and wiped the handle clean with a disinfectant cloth she carried. The night wind chilled her face, but inside her was an intense, indescribable heat. Back at her small suburban apartment, Rachel locked 3 doors, turned on her secure computer. She connected her phone to an encryption system, created a locked copy, and sent it via a special communication channel to Marcus Hayes. Attached was a single line, "Start now. There's something the system won't be able to deny." The screen blinked the status, "File uploaded." Rachel looked into the mirror. Her hair was disheveled from an all-nighter. She felt no fatigue, only a sensation that something inside the system had faltered, not because of fear of her, but because someone had seen the scraped ink they thought no one would notice. Rachel stepped out of Marcus's office late in the afternoon, when the sun had softened and the city was steeped in the thick sounds of rush hour. She carried nothing but a triple-encrypted USB hidden in her inner jacket pocket. Today had been a packed day. A former victim of Lincoln had just confirmed a testimony. Marcus said they had traced a chain of emails among 3 senior officers. Everything was moving in the right direction. As she opened her car door, a deep voice came from the left. "Still moving as fast as back in Quantico, huh?" Rachel turned around, barely reacting, before seeing Evan Doyle a few steps away. He hadn't changed much, still tall and lean, with his hair neatly cut, slightly combed to the right. His eyes flickered between friendliness and scrutiny, as if both glad and wary to see an old acquaintance. "What are you doing here?" Rachel asked directly, hiding no caution. Evan smiled faintly, didn't answer immediately, but looked out onto the street. "Same circle, same job. Yet you disappeared from the radar like you cut yourself out of the system. Don't tell me you're on vacation." Rachel said nothing. Evan turned back to meet her gaze. "Be careful, Rachel. Some things even the FBI doesn't want unearthed. Some people you shouldn't touch, not now." The unfinished sentence hung in the air. Rachel studied him for a few more seconds, eyes narrowing slightly. Evan didn't back down, but his tone softened a bit. "I'm not here to preach, just you should know your limits. Sometimes winning is another kind of losing." She didn't argue, she just nodded quietly and turned toward the door handle. Evan's voice called after her. "I really respected you once. Thought you'd choose a different path." Rachel got into the car without looking back. The engine hummed softly as the car glided away amid distant honks. On the way home, she didn't play music or call Marcus. Evan's words echoed like crashing waves. The phrases were familiar, but his delivery made her suspicious. He didn't ask how she was, nor what she was investigating, yet knew too well the target she was closing in on. Why now? Why him? Arriving home, Rachel didn't go straight to her workspace. She stood in the kitchen, hands resting on the table's edge, eyes fixed on the empty space between the cups. Evan had been the first to believe her in a leak case 5 years ago, the only one who refused a promotion to stand with internal investigators, but he also knew how the system worked, better than anyone else, that truth is never accepted naturally. She opened her laptop, logged into the FBI's secure archive, and accessed the approval history section. Instinct told her to step back, rewind to a time when thought settled. Maybe Evan hadn't changed. Maybe he had never truly stood by her as she once thought. A chilling thought flashed through her mind. The one who knows the most is often the one hidden deepest. Rachel sat before the computer in a room lit only by a pale yellow ceiling light and the steady hum of a cooling fan. She opened the folder Administrative Orders 2019 in the restricted archive. Most documents here were medium-level encrypted, but Rachel had internal access from the Federal Investigation Unit. She filtered by the keyword Lincoln Larson. 2 results appeared. One was a complaint filed in April by a veteran named Gerald Keene, including testimony of being beaten during a document check. The other was a brief titled Recommendation to Suspend Investigation Due to Lack of Grounds, approved by E. Doyle. Rachel did not blink. The name was clear in the document's top right corner. The electronic signature was valid. Verification code matched FBI personnel records. The document was approved less than 24 hours after the complaint was submitted. Notes stated, "Content has no further investigative value due to witness non-cooperation." But Rachel knew that was false. Gerald Keene had handwritten letters sent to 3 different offices, one being the Congressional Inspector General. Everything was suppressed from the root. She downloaded the file, saved it to an external hard drive, and then opened the administrative decision tracking records for 6 months after the event. Evan had not approved any more documents related to Lincoln, but he appeared in 3 regional meetings with the internal inspection team. An internal email sent by the department head after the meeting clearly stated, "Reviewing Larson's records will negatively impact the Bureau's image. Do not dig too deep." Rachel sat silently. She was not shocked, but a bitter chill spread from her wrists to her shoulders. Evan had known. He knew exactly who Lincoln was, what he had done, and how many wounds he had inflicted. And he chose to approve files contrary to what she had thought they both had agreed to pursue. A small sound came from the phone set to silent. A message from Marcus. Access detected from external device. Please recheck permissions. Rachel turned off the screen, put the device into the wall-mouthed safe. She did not reply. All connections for the next few days had to be strictly limited. On her desk still lay a photo taken at Quantico. 4 people standing in a row in front of the main building. Evan was in the middle, his hand casually resting on Rachel's shoulder. Back then, she thought she had found a teammate who understood which limits to break and which to keep. Now, looking back, His stance was not of equal footing but of one controlling the positions of others. Rachel breathed slowly. She knew this would not make her falter. People like Lincoln inflicted wounds, but people like Evan distorted the truth. They did not show themselves, did not strike, but were always in the right place to blur justice line by line, word by word. She took a small notebook from the drawer, wrote down 3 names along with the dates of file approval. At the bottom, she wrote, E. Doyle, verified internal links from 2017 to 2020. The pen stopped, then drew a line beneath the name, not to cross out, but to mark. She wanted to write the ending of that silence herself. Outside, the sky had fully darkened. Streetlights cast a pale orange streak across the window frame. Rachel closed the notebook, stood up, and pulled out her phone. After a few seconds of hesitation, she dialed Marcus. Her voice calm as if waking from a long dream. Starting tomorrow, we will review all files approved by Evan. The past leaves scars if we're willing to look close enough. The sky had not yet fully brightened. The pale blue glow from the phone screen was the first thing Rachel saw upon waking. A message from the service unit, motion sensor alert triggered by the parking lot camera in the early morning hours. She sat up and pulled back the curtain. Her sedan lay quietly on the street, among other parked cars. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, but when she went down to the spot, everything became clear. The driver's side windshield was shattered, shards scattered across the seat and floor mat. On the seat lay a folded white piece of paper without an envelope. Black ink scribbled a short message, "Playing with fire will get your hands burned." No signature. No other identifying marks. Rachel picked up the paper and held it up to the light to check for indentations from the pen strokes, but the back was completely clean. A classic, clumsy threat, but with a clear message. Someone had begun to see her as a real danger. She locked the car and walked back to her apartment, quickly typing a message to Marcus. "My car was vandalized and the driver's seat has a warning." Almost immediately came the reply. "I think I'm being watched. A strange guy has been standing outside the shop across the street for 2 nights. Rachel paused for a moment, then typed again. "Switch to backup device, limit location signals, avoid old routes for now." Back in her room, Rachel opened her safe, took out an external hard drive and an old laptop stripped of all connectivity features. She sat at the desk, checking all stored data. Lists of cases involving Lincoln, internal files of investigative unit meetings, emails between commanding officers, witness testimony recordings. Each folder was uniquely coded and placed in a hidden system to avoid detection if breached. Those monitoring her didn't need to reveal themselves. They had enough tools to make everything suffocating. The vandalism was the first signal. More subtle methods would follow, like disrupting transmissions, making files vanish without anyone knowing where the fault lay. Rachel understood the stakes of this game. What they wanted was not to stop her directly, but to make her stop herself through doubt. She opened the window and looked out onto the street. Morning sunlight slanted through concrete buildings, reflecting off the shattered glass fragments on the car. A stranger walked by, glanced at the damaged car, then hurried on without stopping. No one asked, no one intervened. The city was too familiar with this scene. For a fleeting moment, Rachel felt like the broken glass, exposed in the light, fragile and nobody coming to pick up the piece. But she also knew the truth didn't exist if kept inside. It needed to be pushed out, seen, and protected from hands ready to distort it. The notes in her mind began to reorganize. She needed a data transfer, a destination outside the main system. What she had was already beyond the limit for holding in one place. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. Rachel packed up, took a second phone from the drawer, inserted a new SIM, and activated encrypted communication mode. She would contact an old ally who knew how to build an untraceable transmission line. Darkness had spoken. She could no longer keep the light where it was easily snuffed out. Rachel sat in a small cafe in the city's southern industrial zone, where cell signals were so weak no one considered live streaming or accessing banking systems. She had come here twice before but never entered the cafe. This time she chose a table near the emergency exit, opposite a man wearing a gray jacket holding an old tablet. His name was Leon, a cybersecurity expert who left the government system after discovering citizen data being sold outside. Leon plugged the external hard drive Rachel gave him into a mobile encryption device. Without many questions, he checked the data structure and confirmed no spyware or tracking software was running covertly. It took over 10 minutes to set up an independent transmission line connected to a server located in the central western region using a unique identifier known only to Rachel and Leon. Once the transfer is complete, all physical copies on devices will self-destruct. "What defense mechanisms do you want to set?" Leon asked without looking away from the screen. Rachel answered quickly without hesitation. "Each access requires 3 layers of authentication. If an external signal is detected, data transmission must stop and shut down permanently. If I lose signal for more than 48 hours, automatically send alerts to 3 backup points." Leon nodded, typing rapidly into the command line. Having worked for one of the most sensitive intelligence units, he knew when to listen more than to ask questions. Rachel sat quietly, watching the lines of code scroll on the screen. Each symbol was a fragment of what she and Marcus had gathered, the voices of those silenced one way or another. She didn't know how many people on the list had left the city, or how many still had the courage to step forward if everything collapsed. But she knew these data could no longer remain on her machine. Marcus called after receiving an encrypted signal confirming the secure transmission. His voice was hoarser than usual. "I separated the reports into 3 parts, placing them in 3 different locations. How about you?" Rachel looked out the window. The late afternoon light slanted through dust particles in the air. "Done. If anything happens, I left a final file. You know what to do." They said no more. Each understood their role wasn't in promises, but in preparing for the worst-case scenario without retreat. After the call, Rachel opened her laptop and accessed the server interface. Each folder was renamed, avoiding any investigation terms or character names. She attached a brief note without a recipient name or a timestamp. "If you are reading this, it means I can no longer access the system. What I leave is not to accuse anyone but to allow those once seen as invisible to be seen. Read carefully, choose wisely, and remember, truth does not require forgiveness. It only needs to be heard." She saved and sent the command. The screen showed a confirmation message in an old font, no effects, no sound, simple as a nod. She closed the laptop, packed the devices into her bag, and looked at Leon. He understood, removed the hard drive, cut the circuit board into small pieces with pliers, and put them into an anti-static bag. On the way back, night had fallen. Rachel was not in a hurry. She drove slowly through familiar streets, the lights reflecting coldly on her face in the rearview mirror. Every turn she made had been carefully considered. She didn't know what awaited her ahead, but what needed hiding was no longer in her hands, and that made her feel 100 times lighter than guarding a secret. The message from Whitaker arrived just as dusk settled, while Rachel was reviewing data recently transferred to an external server. The content was brief. Not a single word wasted. "We need to talk, not over the phone." Accompanying it was a GPS coordinate pointing to an abandoned warehouse complex along the old highway, once used by Marcus as an equipment exchange point. Rachel stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked the device and left the apartment without turning on the lights. She arrived at the meeting point exactly on time. Darkness enveloped the entire row of dilapidated buildings like a thick blanket. The only light came from Whitaker's handheld flashlight as he stood leaning against a rusty pillar. He wore a dark brown jacket, the brim of his hat pulled low, nearly covering his eyes. Rachel stopped some distance away, her voice low but firm. "I hope you didn't call me here to say you regret it." Whitaker looked up, his gaze unwavering. "I don't regret being silent, but I feel I have no reason to continue anymore." He handed her a small USB drive wrapped in duct tape. "This is the internal meeting from the 12th. They don't know I recorded it." Rachel took it, her eyes briefly flickering with caution. "Does anyone else know you have this?" Whitaker shook his head. "I haven't told anyone. I planted a microphone inside the meeting room's clock panel, a super tiny one, only activated when volume exceeds 12 decibels. His tone was not boastful. It sounded like someone who had waited too long for this moment and finally had a reason to change course. "You know, if this gets leaked, your career is over," Rachel said. Whitaker replied without hesitation, "I never thought I had a career. I joined the force believing I could make a difference, but in the end I spent all my time watching others distort the truth." He exhaled softly, staring into the darkness at the end of the building row. "I don't want to repeat the mistake I made with Lincoln. I sat in that room, heard every word they said, and still left as if I heard nothing." Rachel nodded, pocketing the USB inside her jacket. She knew Whitaker's words did not come from sudden awakening. They were the result of witnessing the system trample conscience bit by bit until a person either shuts their eyes in acceptance or chooses to face it head on. Whitaker had chosen the latter. Quietly, with no banners, just a recording, she asked one last question before leaving. "Why give this to me now?" He answered firmly, "Because if not now, I'd keep hoping someone else would do it for me." The answer needed no further explanation. Rachel stepped out of the complex, her steps steady, hand still on her jacket pocket, as if holding a flame yet to be ignited. The sky above was moonless, but the wind had changed direction. Rachel returned to her apartment after the city had fallen asleep. She locked 3 doors, drew the curtains tight, and powered on a backup computer connected to an internal network. She avoided accessing the main system or sending any location signals. She plugged in Whitaker's USB, entered the startup code, and sat upright as if preparing for a silent trial. The audio file appeared, titled simply, "Internal Command, June 12, 22. The sound played clearly. The first voice was an older man, a former regional commander, whom Rachel recognized immediately. He spoke evenly, without crescendo, as if reading an administrative report. "Regarding the complaint involving Officer Lincoln Larson, we need to assess the impact before reopening the investigation. The press has already published articles on similar issues. Reopening now is mistimed." A female voice, familiar from media appearances, interjected, "I have reviewed the internal department's report. There were violations, but if it leaks, public opinion will crush the entire image of the department. Social media doesn't want justice, they want blood, and they will take it from our necks." A short laugh echoed in the meeting room. Then the original man concluded, "Bury it. Change the presentation in the report. Focus on the victim's uncooperative behavior. These subjects will never gain community consensus to resist fully." Rachel stopped the playback. She sat motionless for a few seconds, hands on the table as if restraining herself from any angry reaction. Every sentence in the recording lacked menace, but carried tremendous weight. They were not shouted, nor aggressive, but colder, a deliberate calculation to bury the truth in the mud. Marcus arrived right after receiving the message. Together they listened to the recording from beginning to end. Only on the 3rd time did he speak. "They're not protecting Lincoln, they're protecting themselves." Rachel neither nodded nor spoke further. She thought about Gerald Keene, the veteran who had 2 ribs broken but never got a chance to testify, and about the single mother in 2017 who withdrew her complaint letter because she wanted peace to raise her child. Those people were not weak. They just lacked proof, like the recording she now held. The next morning, Rachel backed up the file into 2 encrypted copies. One was sent via a secure channel to the office of the Inspector General. The other she sent to the lawyer representing Lincoln's old victim group, attaching a note. "The time has come." She included no real name, no signature, only data, only the truth, recorded in a voice no one could deny. Before leaving the apartment, Rachel stood by the window, looking out at the city gradually brightening. Her hand still tightly gripped the USB, fingers lightly pressing its plastic edge as if to ensure everything remained intact. She knew what was about to happen was irreversible. She also knew that once a fire was lit from within, what would burn was more than a name. Silence held no value anymore, and anyone who had heard that recording, if they still had a conscience, would understand the facade was cracking. The phone screen lit up just as Rachel was reviewing a series of old reports in the office. The short subject line read, "I used to be silent, not anymore." The sender's address was a random string of characters unidentifiable. Below was an attached audio file. She put on her earphones, hands still on the keyboard, eyes fixed on the rhythm of the female voice that sounded, "My name is Maya Brooks. Lincoln did things to me that no one should endure. If you want to listen, I will tell you." There was no additional information. Rachel was silent for a long moment before saving the file. 1 hour later, she and Marcus stood outside an apartment on the 3rd floor of a quiet residential area in the north of the city. The door was opened by a thin woman with tied-back hair, deep eyes, and a face that could not hide the marks of years of defense. Maya said nothing, simply stepping back to invite them in. The apartment was not large, but meticulously tidy. A picture frame laid tilted on a shelf showed a little boy smiling brightly in a school uniform. Maya put down a glass of water and sat opposite Rachel, hands tightly clasped together. She began to tell her story, straightforward and without hesitation. 7 years ago, I was stopped on my way home. The reason given was a random check, but Lincoln never asked for my papers. He ordered me out, then searched my handbag right on the hood of my car. After that, he pulled me into his vehicle, shut the door, and turned off the radio. Maya's voice faltered slightly before steadying. "No one recorded it, no witnesses allowed. I was held for nearly 3 hours, threatened, forced to sign a statement admitting guilt that I never fully understood." She said she filed a complaint to the Internal Affairs 3 days later. But 2 weeks after, she was abruptly transferred without explanation. Her direct supervisor asked to speak privately, advising her to think more about custody rights than forcing a truth no one wants uncovered. "I'm a single mother. When my child was just 5, I didn't dare to risk it. Every day I recall that scene and wonder if I had been tougher that day, would my life be different?" Rachel listened carefully, not interrupting. Marcus sat slightly back, eyes never leaving the woman's face. No verification was needed. They both knew Maya was telling the truth. The way she spoke, the breaks in her sentences, the controlled yet scattered gaze, all showed a person who once lived in ultimate fear and now decided to unravel it with bare hands. "Recently, my son started asking why his mother was once arrested," Maya said, eyes on the photo. "I lied to him, but lies can't last forever. So I emailed you." She nodded when Rachel asked about recording the entire testimony. Maya looked straight, no evasion. "I was the woman held on the street, silenced in files, erased from statistics. Now I want to be the one who starts the list being read aloud again." Rachel stood and extended her hand. Maya took it with just enough strength, no trembling. Under the soft yellow light falling on the old tiled floor, the two women looked at each other, one once wounded, the other searching deeply for every lingering scar in the files. And now they shared a new starting point. The recorder on the table clicked softly as Rachel pressed start. Maya sat upright, hands on her lap, eyes unblinking. Her voice was broken at first, but gradually became fluid. She detailed the traffic stop from that year, from how Lincoln blocked her car, the contempt in his eyes, to the way he forced her into the patrol car with an authoritative tone that allowed no questions. Each recalled memory felt like a broken bone being touched again. She remembered the license plate clearly, even the smell of disinfectant in the cabin. She recalled that when forced to sign the paper, Lincoln mentioned her son twice. "I thought I had forgotten, but what I really forgot was how to tell it to others." Marcus nodded slightly, signaling Rachel to continue. The recording lasted 14 minutes. When finished, Rachel opened her laptop and retrieved Maya's file from the internal system. The statement Lincoln forced her to sign was saved under the code "resolved on site," with no accompanying images or audio. All data was confined to a single line. The driver cooperated after being reminded. Rachel flipped through the night shift personnel list. One name matched the time frame: Whitaker. He had been present, but the report noted no special observations. Maya nodded when asked again. "I saw him step out of the station while Lincoln was still talking to me. He glanced at me quickly, then turned away." This information made Rachel pause for a few seconds. She pulled out another note from her private files. the record of an officer inexplicably transferred out of internal affairs who had simultaneously received Maya's anonymous complaint letter but never fully acted on it. The connection was becoming clearer. "Are you willing for this testimony to be made public as a witness statement?" Rachel asked, eyes fixed on Maya. The answer came immediately. "I won't back down. If I must defend my real name, I will. I once lost my voice in the files. I won't let others write the next chapter of silence." That same evening, a summary of the testimony was sent to the team of lawyers supervising the investigation. Rachel requested temporary identity protection. But Maya signed a consent form to use her real name in upcoming hearings. Her only condition: "I want to be the first to open the door, so those who follow won't have to bow their heads." The next morning, several newspapers ran brief headlines. "New witness emerges in Lincoln Larson investigation. Former victim now a single mother. Ready to come forward to accuse years of forgotten abuse." Few details were revealed, but the spread had begun. Within 3 hours of the news release, Rachel received 2 new emails. One from a man unlawfully detained in 2016, one from a former officer anonymous, writing only, "I heard about Maya. Back then I stayed silent. Maybe now it's time to change." Rachel entered all information into the encrypted system. On the screen, Maya's testimony was saved as the first entry under active witnesses. She stared at that phrase for a few seconds before shutting down her computer, knowing that silence was finally beginning to break where it had once been strangled the longest. Marcus Hayes sat alone in the old apartment, the desk lamp casting a flickering light onto his laptop screen. He had just finished decoding an internal data set from the hard drive Rachel had sent documents collected from an old civil lawsuit, seemingly worthless. At first, it was just tedious administrative emails. Reminders, rescheduled meetings, shift assignments. But when Marcus scrolled to an oddly titled email, Procedure 4, Leave No Trace, he knew he had hit an underground vein. The messages used vague language, avoiding specifics but still clear enough. The case was removed from the schedule within 48 hours, handled according to procedure, or delete report before uploading to system. No real names, only codes. 1121. These people did not communicate via the main email system, but used temporary mailboxes through an internal server. Clear signs of a shadowy operating group. Marcus quickly captured everything, encrypted the content, and then called Rachel via a secure app. "I think you should see this," he said, attaching the file. Rachel opened it, her eyes darkening as she read the line. "Internal handling. No reporting. Agreed upon since last week." "How long has this club existed?" she asked. "I'm not sure," Marcus replied, "but the oldest thread dates back 4 years, and in one deleted email, there's a signature from Roy Dempsey." Rachel fell silent. Roy Dempsey, her former boss in internal investigations, the man who had pressured her to withdraw from a wrongful eviction case 5 years ago. "So he's part of it?" she said. Marcus added, "I also found a few IP addresses sending mail matching the city council headquarters, not just the police." Rachel stared at the screen and slowly said, "This isn't just about protecting an officer. It's a system, protecting itself by bending every rule. And it knows how to erase every trace," Marcus said. "We only have what was missed. The rest has been cleaned meticulously." Rachel focused on the repeated phrase Procedure 4 across many emails. She understood its meaning. Secret meetings, no minutes, no evidence. That was where justice was redefined. She closed her laptop and looked out into the dark window. "They think we'll give up when we hit a thick wall, but I don't need to break the wall. I just need a crack." Marcus replied in a low voice, "And this time, you're not looking for that crack alone." Marcus continued to dig deeper into the data. From the email metadata, he traced specific IP addresses. One belonged to the Internal Investigation Office of the City Police Department, once considered neutral in misconduct reviews. He froze. The Procedure 4 Club emails were not limited to police. They expanded. A city legal advisor, an assistant from the mayor's office, 9 people in total, most of whom had participated in closed inspections. or issued press releases after controversial incidents. Marcus compiled everything and sent a preliminary report to Rachel. In her small office, Rachel opened the file. Each name emerged, each tangled connection. They were present in suppressed cases, reports edited to internal communication standards, cameras accidentally malfunctioning at key moments. They didn't just protect Lincoln Larson, but at least 4 other officers, accused of abuse, witness intimidation, and evidence tampering. Every complaint tightened the system, silent, coordinated, and erasing all trace. Rachel said nothing for nearly 10 minutes. She read slowly, scrolling through every line, as if recalling strange cases she had witnessed but could never prove. Finally, she closed the laptop, stood up, and her eyes were still cold. "We don't investigate individuals, we investigate the whole system. And we must act before it knows we're looking right at it." Marcus nodded. "They'll realize soon enough." Rachel turned to her desk, opened a secure encrypting device, and logged in to the FBI's internal secure portal, something she had been granted in her special position but rarely used. She drafted an urgent report, attaching the list, email histories, and IP data. The subject line she typed slowly but decisively: "Request to activate Special Investigation Authority, state-level internal cover-up network." As she pressed send, a soft ping cut through the silence of the room. She knew that from that moment there would be no turning back. But Rachel's eyes did not waver. She had come too far to stop now, and somewhere in the shadows those others began to sense. This time, someone was looking straight at them, with all the light of truth. The cafe was located on the corner of the Southern Administrative District, a place few frequented despite being only a few blocks from the city hall. The atmosphere was quiet, with dark wooden tables and chairs set against the walls. The warm yellow lighting created a sense of discretion rather than coziness. Rachel arrived 10 minutes early and chose a seat near the window, overlooking the parking lot and entrance. She placed her handbag on the opposite chair, took out her phone to check the recording app she had activated earlier. The small indicator light glowed green. Everything was working. She sat upright, arms gently crossed, eyes looking out onto the street. She had already pictured the entire scenario in her mind, but maintained a relaxed expression, as if attending a casual meeting. Shortly after, Thornell Beckett appeared. He wore a gray suit and a dark green tie, carrying himself with the confidence of a man who never feared consequences. Rachel stood and offered a light handshake, then gestured to the chair. Beckett ordered black coffee, no sugar, like the habits rumored in closed meetings, brief, direct, and leaving no aftertaste. Rachel began with a few polite remarks, mentioning that recently the media had started scrutinizing old files and the pressures facing the local justice system. She said she was under questioning from subordinates, reporters, and the community alike. "I don't want to make mistakes, but I also don't want to become a scapegoat," she said evenly. Beckett nodded, sipped his coffee, then leaned back as if he had long awaited this conversation. "You were right not to fight the system, at least not in front of it," Beckett said. "When the public uproar rises, don't rush to stand up. Sit still. Then the tide will recede." Rachel listened silently, occasionally nodding, skillfully steering the conversation toward cases she had found suspicious but lacked evidence. She mentioned the Mendoza family property seizure in 2019, which the official report concluded was entirely clean. "At the time, I was only a level 2 investigator, but reading carefully I still saw something off," she said softly. Beckett raised an eyebrow, smiled faintly, and lowered his voice. "I remember editing a few lines in the final draft. Small stuff, to avoid unnecessary legal trouble." Rachel did not interrupt. She sipped her coffee, eyes following the street outside. That statement was enough. Beckett did not yet realize he had crossed a line. He continued talking about preserving internal image, about not being too idealistic in a pragmatic environment. To him, adjusting reports was a skill, not a wrongdoing. The conversation lasted about 20 minutes. Rachel played the role of an attentive student. When Beckett glanced at his watch, she knew the time was up. She stood, shook hands in thanks, pretending to treasure the valuable advice. When she turned to retrieve her handbag, her hand subtly tilted to switch off the recorder inside the bag. The green light vanished. Leaving the cafe, Rachel did not call a car immediately. She walked slowly through 3 intersections, pulled out her phone, played the recording, and fast-forward to the needed segment. Beckett's clear voice echoed amid the clinking of spoons against cups. "I remember editing a few lines." She plugged in her earphones, saved the file in 3 different locations, then drafted a message. The bait took the hook. Sent to the handler. The message needed no recipient name. That person was already waiting for this moment, and Rachel knew, with a recording like this, one ill-timed nod could bring the entire system down a notch. The next morning, the recording was sent to Marcus via double-layer encryption. Rachel added no further comment, but with the content obtained, he fully understood the weight of this move. An ordinary conversation had become evidence strong enough to overturn files long thought dormant forever. Marcus returned an analysis of the voice with confirmation. Voice match 100%. Duration valid. Quality sufficient for submission. Rachel read the message as she stepped into the Eastern FBI Internal Affairs office. She had booked the appointment under the pretext of reviewing administrative evidence, but in truth, she knew this was the moment to make the next move. In meeting room number 3, equipped with a central recorder and a surveillance camera behind, Rachel sat opposite 2 technicians. They listened to the recording, nodding repeatedly, but their expressions shifted as the phrase, edited a few lines in the draft, played a second time. One stopped playback and looked at Rachel. "You know the Mendoza case stirred controversy. If this is confirmed, the case will be reopened and escalated to the federal level." Rachel nodded slightly. "I reviewed the original documents stored in the central system and the handwritten print in the archive. There's a discrepancy. The wording was softened, removing the note about the seizure lacking verification from the bank." The other technician spoke. "This is a sign of file manipulation, and the person responsible is Thornell Beckett, the former deputy head of regional security." He leaned back, silent for a moment. "This won't stay internal." Rachel said little. She had anticipated this reaction. The issue was no longer what Beckett said, but everything he had touched would be re-examined. One link had been exposed. More importantly, she confirmed the manipulation method, oral instruction, minor edits, leaving no clear original documents. Later that day, Rachel received a call from federal authorities. She was asked to summarize all contents related to Beckett and previous cases with signs of misconduct he had authorized. Her list included 6 cases: property seizures, investigation suspensions, mitigation of disciplinary conclusions, and personnel file evaluations. Each showed repeated use of the same tactic, altering language in the final drafts. Quietly, precisely, and legitimized by the reputation of a man always seen as skilled in crisis diplomacy. That night, Marcus sent an additional message. "Received internal intel. Beckett summoned urgently. Someone in his group is starting to panic." Rachel read the message, closed her phone, and said nothing. In the quiet room, only the wind whistling through the door crack and the yellow street light spreading on the wooden floor could be heard. She opened her notebook and underlined a name, TB, this time with a bold cross, not to mark victory, but to warn herself. Anyone who had ever sat high enough in the system could bear part of the truth the entire system tried to conceal. An hour later, she called Whitaker. The young officer who had once chosen silence was now one of her staunchest allies. "We have a gap in the internal reporting system from Beckett's time," she said firmly. "I need you to review all reports that Beckett had the authority to edit. Compare them to the original drafts if still available, especially the last 3 years. Whitaker did not ask why. He replied briefly, "I'll work silently, but if there's another violation, this will become a federal-scale issue." Rachel smiled. The first time in weeks. The puzzle pieces were no longer scattered, and as the system began to be doubted by insiders, the fight was no longer hers alone. The phone rang in the dim pre-dawn light. Rachel woke up instantly at the first ring. The screen displayed a 3-tier encrypted code sequence, used only for emergency communication. She answered, her voice steady, though not fully awake. "Agent Monroe speaking." On the other end was a man. his voice deep and his manner terse. "I'm calling from the Federal Inspector General's office. You are required to prepare all documents related to the Lincoln Larson case and associated individuals. The hearing will take place within the next 72 hours at the Eastern Coordination Zone." Rachel did not respond immediately. The man continued, maintaining his measured tone. "You will receive the official summons within 3 hours. From this moment, you will be protected by the Federal Security Unit. Your location will be encrypted and personal communications will temporarily cease surveillance." The last sentence came as a veiled warning beneath bureaucratic language. She understood. Any loophole could be exploited. After the call, Rachel got out of bed and turned on all the lights in the apartment. The familiar space suddenly felt different, as if every object was scrutinizing her in return. She went straight to her office, opened the safe, and took out 2 hard drives, a memory card, and a notebook stuffed with many pieces of paper filled with her distinctive handwriting. Her hand skimmed over each device, eyes scanning the label. Everything was arranged chronologically, from her arrest in the parking lot to Beckett's recorded confession about falsifying reports. She booted up her computer, logged into a secondary storage system that no one had ever accessed before. She knew the summons from the Inspector General's office did not appear by chance. It was a sign that the investigation had gone beyond local control and entered the deep waters of the federal system. This also meant risks. Every document disclosed could be challenged. Every unverified detail could become a vulnerability. She needed to double-check everything, eliminate unverified assumptions, and lock down mismatched data points. There was no more time for mistakes. For the next 2 hours, Rachel worked in complete silence. Every keystroke was decisive. She did not allow herself to waver, even knowing there was information she had not yet cross-hackered with third parties. She marked sections needing supplements and flagged gaps in personnel connections. Marcus's team would continue the digital review, while she had to clarify every legal step. As daylight began to filter through the curtains, her internal mailbox signaled a new email from Marcus. The subject was succinct: "System response." The content contained only one sentence: "This is no longer an internal investigation." Rachel sat silently for a few seconds before the screen. She looked up at the board on the wall, still dotted with dozens of colorful sticky notes marking relationships among involved individuals. In the center of the large map was Lincoln Larson's photo, branching off to Beckett, Evan Doyle, the document approval group, and a chain of cases with manipulated data. The links were no longer scattered. They were tightening, and when tightened enough, something would break, in a way no one could predict. The Federal Inspector General's office headquarters stood separate from the downtown area, surrounded by triple-layer security fences and 360-degree camera clusters at all entrances. Rachel presented her summons at the first checkpoint. They confirmed her identity, scanned her retina, and pressed her fingerprints on the encryption device. She was not allowed to bring laptops, hard drives, phones, or any data storage devices. All evidence she presented had been sent previously through a secure gateway in double encrypted data form. 2 security officers led her down a long corridor with white floors. Fluorescent lights reflected coldly like the atmosphere itself. A stainless steel door opened to reveal a soundproof meeting room with a low ceiling and walls lined with gray acoustic panels. 5 people sat at one end of the long table. They did not stand or introduce themselves. A man in a navy blue suit nodded, signaling Rachel to take a seat in the middle of the room. The hearing began with identity verification and reasons for the summons. The voice reading the minutes was steady, emphasizing that Rachel was not under investigation but regarded as a special witness with professional authority. Yet the way they asked questions made it clear. This was not a mere administrative formality. They requested Rachel to recount the entire investigative timeline, from her arrest to submitting the Beckett file. Rachel answered clearly and coherently, citing evidence with document codes. She presented key facts: the baseless arrest, infractions in the Lincoln file, Beckett's recorded admission of report tampering, and a list of 6 cases showing signs of manipulated administrative approval. A woman on the supervisory panel interrupted midway, asking detailed questions about how Rachel approached witnesses. Another asked about data verification tools, requesting Rachel explain her method for cross-referencing drafts and official texts. She responded one by one, including supplementary information already sent via the internal network. The hearing lasted nearly an hour without applause or remarks. Then an older man placed his hand on the table, his voice deep and scrutinizing. "Are you aware that during this process, at least one anonymous individual has helped you access data beyond the usual permissions?" Rachel held his gaze, expression unchanged. The man continued, "We received information about unauthorized access from a device bearing an internal ID, not part of the system authorized for regional investigators." He paused. "Can you identify who that might be?" Rachel immediately understood the implication. Someone was trying to create a crack in her file, redirecting suspicion from Beckett to her inside support. Possibly Marcus, possibly Whitaker. She did not react hastily. "I will cooperate to clarify that access if a trace is necessary, but I can confirm all data in my possession has been handled according to security clearance protocols." The 4 council members said no more. Only the older man nodded lightly and took notes. The hearing ended with a brief announcement. Within 7 days, Rachel would receive an official evaluation and further instructions. As she left the room, a young security officer approached, handing her a small silver device and a sealed envelope. "Personal tracking device, enhanced protection mode. If traced or followed, press the button for 3 seconds. Rachel stepped outside. The sun was rising, sharp yet cold. She did not feel relief, nor did the pressure dissipate. But one thing was clear. The game had moved to a different level, and there, the rules were no longer written on paper. The large conference room at the federal headquarters had been prepared since early morning, with seats reserved for the press, filled from the front row all the way to the entrance. Cameras were placed close together, lenses pointed directly at the podium adorned with a white backdrop bearing the national emblem, flanked by American flags. The space was full of ceremonial gravity, yet carried pressure greater than a verdict. No one spoke loudly, and no one took their eyes off the central position. The spokesperson appeared on time, tall and thin, wearing a dark suit and thin-rimmed glasses. He did not begin with empty platitudes, but went straight to the point. "The investigation, coordinated by the Office of the Inspector General, has entered its 2nd phase. As of today, we officially announce the list of individuals suspended and under investigation for misconduct in the law enforcement system in specific areas." He paused briefly, then looked down at the files before him. The first name was announced loudly, along with the title: Deputy Chief of the Ridgepoint East Police Department. Next came the Internal Security Captain, a state-level personnel records officer, and an administrative deputy director who had stood beside Lincoln at a recent press conference. In total, 7 names all had appeared once on television, fiercely defending the transparency and ethics of the agency. Now they stood on the opposite side, their names read like an unfolding indictment. Outside the conference room, phones immediately lit up. Major news outlets pushed out headlines. 7 suspended in federal investigation. Deputy chief who defended Lincoln under investigation. Less than 30 minutes later, a new hashtag appeared on social media. Citizens from many cities began sharing overlooked incidents, unanswered complaint letters, and personal stories linked to one or more names just released. A female reporter stood and raised her hand. When called on, she spoke without hesitation. Question for the Office of the Inspector General. Why wait until public pressure became strong enough to open investigations against individuals with positions and voices in the system? Is this a reactive move to public opinion? The spokesperson did not avoid the question. He replied in a low voice, eyes steady. We investigate based on evidence, not emotion. But it is undeniable that public public opinion has accelerated the verification process. The answer was enough to maintain order in the hall, but also clarified one thing. Truth can be delayed, but not hidden forever, and once it leaks, no one controls its flow. In an office nearly 40 miles away, Rachel watched the press conference on her computer screen. She showed no reaction except a slight blink when the fifth name was read. That was the person who refused to sign the request to investigate Larson in 2019. Beside the computer, her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Brief. This is just the first layer. The surface has just been stirred. Rachel placed her hand on the file stack before her. She knew well, the first exposed individuals were not the core of the network, but each publicly named person was a broken link, and when the chain begins to crack, no mechanism keeps it intact for long. The second day after the press conference, an unsigned internal article circulated within the statewide police network, titled, "When the Gatekeeper Loses the Compass." The article did not mention any suspended names directly, but every word was like a needle pricking sensitive spots. Phrases like culture of blind obedience and rewarded silence made many shudder. It did not come from outside, not from the press or public, but from within the ranks, once protecting each other behind a facade of honor. On professional forums, some officers began removing profile pictures related to Lincoln. A man who publicly defended Beckett denied all his previous views, writing that he was misled by the internal information filtering system. Some took extended leave. Others sent symbolic apology letters. All showed one thing. The masks were falling, not out of remorse, but from those who sensed the fire at their feet. Rachel did not spend much time following those reactions. What caught her attention more was an anonymous letter appearing in her secure personal inbox. The handwritten subject read, "A truth never put on paper." Inside was an attached file containing an internal list, periodically updated by the administrative team under Beckett's unit. The list included names, positions, and 3 columns of notes: level of protection priority, political risk if investigated, and most recent contact time. On the 8th line, Rachel saw a name that made her rise from her chair. Jared Kessler. He was one of the 5 members of the Federal Oversight Council who had testified with her 3 days earlier. The note beside his name read, "Supported locking sensitive content access since February last year. No further leaks." The terse note was a warning bell to Rachel. Part of the investigative system was also controlled from the shadows. She called Marcus immediately, sending all data with verification codes. He fell silent for a few seconds upon reading Kessler's name. "If this guy is involved, then your entire testimony transcript is being monitored from inside. We need an independent backup outside the federal server." Rachel nodded, though Marcus could not see. She had prepared for this situation long ago. An information control system within the very mechanism called oversight, a closed structure where the guards are also the ones erasing the traces. That evening, sitting alone in her small office, Rachel reopened the list of suppressed cases taped to the desk edge since the day she began the investigation. Amid numerous bullet points was a handwritten line in black ink, 2017 case file. Died in holding cell. She circled that line, drew a red arrow to the margin, and wrote, "No witnesses, no video evidence, internal report closed within 24 hours. She had never touched this case before due to scant and vague data, but now, after the leaked list, the anonymous email, and Jared Kessler's name, everything led back there. A death no one cared to mention, an unusually quick closed report, and a chain of manipulation operating early on. Outside, the rain began to fall. The sound of drops tapped against the window frame. Rachel stood, pulled the wallboard closer, and taped an additional note in the upper left corner. She no longer needed confirmation. The next battle would not be fought before the media, nor on hearing tables. It would be where blurred records awaited to be reread by someone unafraid of losing their position or their faith. The courtroom at dawn felt like a vast box sealed against sound. Every seat was filled, yet no one spoke, no one fidgeted. Cold, white ceiling lights washed evenly over the numbered rows. the polished wood floor gleaming as though no foot had ever stepped there. Reporters from across the country were present, cameras positioned precisely within permitted zones, no crowding, no shouted names. As in ordinary trials, a near-sacred hush blanketed the room, as if people had not come to watch a hearing but to examine the very framework of a system cracking apart. The steel door at the right corner swung open. Lincoln Larson was between two federal officers. His gray prison uniform seemed to shrink him, his shoulders slumped, and his stride no longer carried authority. Hair once slicked back now showed clear streaks of gray. No applause, no ridicule. The silence that followed him down each row was the heaviest weight a human could bear. The prosecutor rose, opened a thick file clearly numbered along the spine, and spoke in a voice that cut the air like a blade. Count 1, abuse of power in the line of duty. 2, falsifying arrest records. 3, assaulting detainees in violation of regulations. 4, unauthorized interference with the internal evidence management system. 5, threatening subordinate witnesses during the investigation. 6, deliberately concealing misconduct. 7, manipulating internal disciplinary procedures to protect personal position. Each charge read aloud formed a verdict in embryo, though the official ruling was yet to come. Lincoln offered no interruption, no comment. He sat still, eyes lowered, fingers lightly clasped on the wooden table. Behind him, the row reserved for the regional police department was entirely empty. A nameplate marked the unit, set exactly as in prior sessions, yet today no one came. Those who once appeared beside him in press conferences, once defended him on television, were gone. Some had been suspended, some chose silence. The rest kept quiet to distance themselves from a stain spreading fast. Lincoln's defense team of 3 lawyers looked tense, stripped of the confidence they had shown in earlier hearings. Their strategy had shifted from defending innocence to containing damage. They spoke of age, occupational stress, internal guideline conflicts, and the opaque procedures their client had been obliged to follow. None of it reached the core. They did not deny the crimes, they merely sought to lessen them. In the federal witness observation area, Rachel sat in a back corner behind one-way's glass. Dressed in a dark shirt and carrying no documents, she rested her hands on her lap, eyes fixed on Lincoln. She did not blink when he tried to glance her way. His look lingered for seconds, fragile as a thread seeking a way back. Rachel did not hold it. She turned her face aside. In that moment, Lincoln seemed to shrink further. No one stood with him. No emblem or office remained for shelter, and the empty chairs behind him told the entire truth. That afternoon, the trial resumed with the prosecution's final presentation of evidence. The room was still packed, yet no one moved an inch. All present understood this was not a routine case, but the closing statement to a decade-long silence. The prosecutor began with a thick dossier, projecting in turn audio clips, videos, and extracts from internal files. First came jail camera footage from 2018, showing a man dragged from a cell, arms wrenched behind him, pleading while everyone ignored him. Next, an audio file of Beckett admitting he adjusted a few lines in the report. The N. Whitaker's testimony about verbal orders to overlook evidence in the Mendoza case. No objections arose from the defense. Each piece drove another nail into the already shredded image of Lincoln Larson. The evidence came from multiple layers, multiple times, impossible to refute. Lincoln remained motionless. His face seemed frozen, only his eyes tracking the images on the screen. When the video showed the man screaming in custody, Lincoln's hand twitched slightly, yet he stayed silent. From beginning to end, he uttered not a word. The judge asked the defense for final remarks. One lawyer stood, bowed slightly, and spoke calmly. Our client has served law enforcement for 30 years. Despite grave mistakes, we ask the court to consider humanitarian factors, age, health, and organizational context when the violations occurred. The plea held no weight, a thin bandage over a gangrenous wound, and the judge invited Lincoln to speak. He raised his head, scanned the room, then looked at the floor. If you were born as I was, he said slowly. Lived where I did, worked with what I've seen. Would you have acted differently? No one answered. No protest, no sympathy. The question sought no reply. It was the echo of a man falling into his own abyss. The prosecutor stepped forward one last time. This is not a bad individual. This is the product of a system that sets power to grow without oversight. One person may be forgiven. A system cannot. The words pressed the room downward, a quiet shedding of responsibility long hidden beneath fine rhetoric. The judge delivered a brief ruling. Lincoln was found guilty on all counts. The session closed with a single gavel strike, not loud, yet enough to seal the last door of an era of cover-ups. No applause, no outcry. Everyone sat still, watching the figure who once embodied authority, now led away like any other convict. Rachel left the observation room unnoticed. Her shoes clicked dryly along the corridor. In her hand was a new file marked Special Investigations Unit, Deployment Proposal next month. She did not look back at the courtroom, nor dwell on the sentence. She understood today was not an ending. It was proof that justice can prevail once if one is persistent enough, clear-headed enough, and cold enough not to be seduced by a temporary victory. Under the white lights of the second-floor auditorium at the regional FBI headquarters, the press conference unfolded amid a tense anticipation. Seats were fully occupied early by reporters from over 20 news agencies. Microphones crowded the long table before the podium. After the official verdict against Lincoln Larson and his accomplices, everyone awaited a confirmation, a declaration of change. Rachel Monroe stepped out from the side door, wearing a simple white shirt and dark gray vest. Neat, but not flashy, she walked straight to the microphone, nodding lightly as a greeting. Flashes flickered briefly, then stopped as she raised her hand. "I will only say this once," she began, voice firm but calm, "and I am not here to receive accolades." The auditorium hushed. Many media outlets had dubbed her the silent special agent, the one who exposed justice, or the ghost within law enforcement. But those titles faded with her opening words. "I am not here to be a symbol," she said. "I am here because too many have been arrested, humiliated, not for what they did, but because of their skin color, their status, and the silence of those who should have spoken." Silence deepened in the front rows. One reporter stopped writing. Rachel looked directly at them, without notes or slides. "I opened the files," she said, "but not alone. Maya Brooks spoke out after 7 years of silence. Whitaker, a young cop, chose truth over career. Many others, without cameras, without media or social networks, only courage. Unconditional." That sentence cut sharply, lowering cameras and eyes alike. Rachel stood upright, hands free, back away from the podium. When the moderator invited questions, she nodded but declared, "I will not talk about myself or what I endured. Those things don't matter if they don't help others." A voice from the back asked quietly, "How do you feel now? After all, are you afraid?" Rachel turned. No smile, just steady, calm. "I have never stopped fearing," she said. "Fear of labels, isolation, failure to protect. But fear isn't the worst. The worst is letting fear stop us from acting." She paused once more, then lowered the microphone. No bow, no media moment. She left the stage as she came, not the center of light, but lifting it off those who deserved it. Late that night, a small meeting convened on the 5th floor of federal headquarters. No cameras, no microphones. Just Rachel, Marcus Hayes, Whitaker, and a female lawyer representing the Special Task Force. The windows stood open, night air carrying city scents mixed with old paper. The pale ceiling light did little to soften the tension. Marcus spread a digital map marked with red dots. "Cases untouched, files feared. We touched one layer," he said evenly, "but not the deepest." He pointed to 3 names: a state police HR chief, a chief of internal affairs, and the head of a local security reform fund, all linked financially or administratively to Larson's manipulations. Whitaker sat with arms crossed, eyes drifting as Rachel mentioned old victims. He'd witnessed truths revealed and suppressed repeatedly in internal meetings. Now, he bridged colleagues who began to resist refusing to bow further. Rachel studied the map. "We have the verdict," she said slowly, "but not the end. Justice isn't a period after the trial. It's a journey, long, winding, needing someone to walk it." The lawyer handed Rachel a draft plan to expand the investigation, targeting the network that kept Larson in power for over a decade. Rachel signed the front page and closed it. "Start with the 2014 audit lead. That person deleted 2 lines from a special budget report. No heroics here, just another step on a dusty road where footprints serve as proof of those daring to move forward." Before leaving, Marcus asked quietly, "Do you feel lighter?" Rachel buttoned her coat, eyes fixed on the wall. "No, not yet. Maybe when the last victim no longer needs to prove their worth." On the way home, Rachel checked her phone. A new email lay at the bottom. Subject: "I stayed silent, not anymore." Sender: a district officer from another city outside the old investigation's reach. The attachment: 2018 suspended arrest order. Rachel saved it, opened her car door, and sat quietly. She looked out over the silent city, buildings under yellow lights, streets unmarked on the investigation map. Beneath the calm, stories remained untold. People like Maya, Whitaker, and herself, once silent, hoped survival meant silence. She typed a short note and an internal memo to headquarters. "Justice is not the outcome, but the process of bringing light into places accustomed to darkness. Shortening shadows isn't victory. It means those who follow won't walk so far." She sent it. Outside, car lights stretched cold and long. Rachel no longer saw herself at the center, but she knew this clearly. Sometimes, to bring light, you must first narrow the darkness.